Hi, everybody. Welcome back. We are here for another one of your questions about work. And we've had this theme that we've talked about a few times, but maybe not with as fiery a perspective as we might today, which is to say, how are we negotiating, particularly for knowledge work, where we do the work from? So for those of you who are here for the first time, I'm Roy. I'm a startup investor in the future of work, and we answer your questions about work. And I'm here with my extended colleague, Julia Hobsbawm, who is the author of the book, The Nowhere Office, podcast by the same name, is a columnist for Bloomberg Work Shift, which is Bloomberg's future of work related coverage. And so, Julia, you've been thinking about this question deeply, and I can't wait to hear what you have to say. We now, many of us, I do certainly, live in a quote unquote hybrid workplace where we're home sometimes and in the office sometimes. And so the question that we've got is, how do I make the days that I spend there, like I've actually made the choice to go and commute in and plug my car into the electric charger and the whatever and, wish my kids goodbye. How do I make those days worth it?
Well, hi, everybody. Hello,
Thank
Roy.
you.
Thank you for inviting me to join you. I'm joining from London. Well, hybrid is hard. Hybrid is here and hybrid is hard. I do think about it a lot. There's another way of describing hybrid, which is, of course, flexibility. But there's no doubt that, it's in flux. There's no set pattern. And that in itself is causing a lot of angst. So there are sort of two or three ways in which this is not yet set or fixed. Number one is nobody can agree what the right hybrid pattern is, although the settle down is sort of 2 to 3 days a week, like 50% of the time for, as you said rightly, knowledge workers. The bad news is no one can agree which days they are. So in London, we talk about the twat, which is a pejorative term if in case you don't know, which stands for Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays. And a slightly more sober version is potato, possibly on Tuesdays or Thursdays. But, part of the real difficulty is how do you get meaningful, impactful, productive, creative, culturally rich work when you don't know who's in and where? And then the other problem, which your card put up at the beginning, the provocation, is it's really political because you have a lot of managers and leaders and bosses clashing intergenerationally and politically. So loads of positives,
just to make sure, just to make sure that I understand what you mean by politically. By the way, I think some hybrid work, just to make one observation, is flexible and some isn't, in the sense that, I feel like, there's this apocryphal story that Eskimo have 100 words for snow. And I feel like we may need 100 words for the different variations of hybrid, because the choice, you started giving some yourself, Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays, possibly, ... One of the, I think, variations is how much choice is given to the individual, to the team. There are companies, I was talking to somebody from SAP where their policy is basically managers get to decide. It's like, okay, but if the middle manager has a conflict with the manager above them, now to get to your political point, I'm just curious to hear you say more about that. Do you just mean that people have different interests that clash with each other, or different wants that clash with each other, that they're sort of negotiating on the field of play of when people come into the office, or do you say more?
Yeah, the politics are that, not everybody is in control of when and where and how they work and what work they do. And,
right.
The toxic workplace has been very exposed. I don't know whether you know this, you probably do, Roy, but, the most streamed show in America during the pandemic was The Office. The show about
I did not know that. I know my son definitely contributed to that intensively.
Right, 57 billion minutes, I think. I want to say hours, but I think it's minutes.
Wow.
So by politics, I mean everything from sort of big P politics to Elon Musk or Jamie Dimon, almost humiliating workers.
Come in.
But, and saying, oh, you're phoning it in, to the small p, which is very well intentioned people trying to say, look, we need you in because we need to know what's happening, or we need to build the culture. So politics spans a whole range. But just to your point about the language, flex is a much more meaningful term than hybrid. Hybrid does in fact sound like a car, But flex is the name of the
Or
game.
like some genetic mutation.
Right. But I agree with you that to some degree, it doesn't matter what you say. We know what we're talking about, which is changed patterns of work.
Yeah. And I'll just say I'm going to offer something that may be provocative and wrong. So I'm not going to say I deeply believe it, but okay. But, I think that in addition to the generational differences that you described, just personal preferences. And by the way, if I live 5 minutes from the office, my view on coming in is going to be different than if I live 45 minutes from the office. If I have kids, my view is going to be different. But I also think there's a legitimate aspect that is the more senior you are in a large organization, arguably the more benefit you get personally from having people around you, because you can then, you can communicate with them more readily. You can do all kinds of stuff. And so there's a way in which I think there's a legitimate CEO interest, if you will, or senior executive interest that's different from the junior manager interest, because a junior manager is not that hard to communicate with 3 or 4 people on Slack or something like that. But the second you have a purview that extends really widely, the efficiency of presence is really, I think, can be powerful. So here's the provocative thing. Is the data starting to tell us that working from home is just less productive? Because, which by the way, may be true, right? I mean, in the sense that we have lots of limitations in the workplace on productivity. We have a work day that, on some level, there are some bosses who would like people to work 24/7, 7 days a week, but we limit it for the sake of humanity and long-term productivity. And so I guess one question is, where do you stand on this view of whether being in the office kind of per day is actually just a more productive way to work?
Well, I love your 57,000 questions at once, Roy. That's really putting me through my paces. I mean, just
it lets you talk about whatever you think, because
I'm totally up for it. The short answer to your provocation is, and I would cite Nicholas Bloom of Stanford's WFH research, and Nick and I've interviewed him. We talk, the short answer, and I also talk quite a lot to Rob Sado of the Flex Index, which is pretty much the largest ongoing corporate data set in real time of what's happening. And I'm actually going to be interviewed on his show, and I've interviewed him on mine.
Cool.
Both the Flex Index and Scoop and WFH data, as far as I can tell, do not show that productivity dips. However, productivity is incredibly difficult to measure and is often politicized. It's very easy to say.
Right. Now, it's in the eye of the observer.
Okay. And that famous saying about there are lies, damn lies, and then there are statistics. I mean, no one fixed situation applies to another, but it did before the pandemic. So what you have, as I often look in the historical context, what you have is a very difficult situation where pre-pandemic, there was a norm. It was buildings-based. It was rigidly time-based. There was a commute. Everybody sucked up the discomfort, and you got your perks and your freedom through promotion, through seniority, through the business card, through the conference, and some flexibility. The pandemic happened, and actually we know that corporate America and the corporate world literally became fantastically productive thanks to the technology. So then you have a situation where people go back, but their habits have changed, their lives have changed, their reality has changed. So then saying to them, oh, well, the culture's not right. Oh, well, the productivity's not right. They just don't buy it. You have to make a different argument. And that's my provocation is, I don't have skin in the game, despite writing a book called The Nowhere Office. I don't believe in no office at all. I totally believe in an office some of the time and in culture and all those things. But we have to keep it real that the times have changed. And one other point on your point is about generations is, oddly, it's not the seniors that benefit so much from being in the office, although some old fuddy-duddies need to see you present or they don't believe you're working. It's more that the youngsters, they need it, partly because there's better
Mentorship.
conditions and because they're osmotically picking up what the European chairman of PwC, Kevin Ellis, said to me as birdsong. You're hearing it in the office.
Put.
Bit of a
Beautifully
shame that Elon has nixed the bird, because bird song is exactly what that juice is. So what do you think about my provocation to your provocation?
So I definitely think that there is osmotic value that we don't yet know how to pick up other than in person. I think about all these times in my career where I just walked past something happening and picked something up, or saw an opportunity that I would not otherwise have seen. I think that plays out over a longer period of time for the junior people. And for the senior people, I think the benefit can be more immediate, whether it's because of habit, or honestly, because I do think that if you want to communicate unpredictably with large groups of people in shifting ways, in person is just the highest bandwidth form of communication we have. You walk over, you say something, somebody picks it up. The flip side for the leader of the junior person's osmotic learning of their birdsong is, if I say something to someone, if I type something to someone on Slack, the chance of somebody else overhearing it penetrating their ambient awareness and then being able to do something with it is lower than in person, I think, in general.
But I would reframe that slightly. I wrote a book called Fully Connected before the Nowhere Office, and I appropriated Maslow's hierarchy of needs and said that there was a hierarchy of communication where mass communication and social media and mass media, which reaches the most people, is actually the least intimate. And actually what I think we need to be measuring is intimacy. This is pretty intimate. This is fine. There are lots and lots of multinationals all over the world, that routinely don't meet in person. Psychotherapy has proved to be fantastically
100%,
effective
100%.
digitally. So I think we need to be really careful, and this comes back to the politics. I'm not saying you're doing it, but it's important not to weaponize distance as a proxy for this discussion about trust, intimacy, creativity. That's really what I would say to that.
I think it's beautifully put, because, one way in which I think the discussion quickly devolves to nonsense is not all work from home is the same. Not all roles are the same. Not all, I had a deep relationship with my attorney for years and years and years, where we only ever spoke on the phone, to the point where I met him in person. I didn't even know what race he was, and
interesting.
And we've all had business relationships that are like that, where they develop gradually over time. And I think we're just in this period of experimentation. And that's why I find the wisdom you have really helpful. Can I ask one more mini question before we break?
Yes.
This is a mini question, I hope an easy one. From the perspective of an individual, if I am a person working in my career and it's Tuesday, I'm going into the office, how is going into the office now and trying to make the most of it different, do you think, if at all, from pre-pandemic, all of that? How should I make the most of it as an individual?
Well, it's very much to do with the choreography and the coordination of who else is in and why you need to be in. And I think that what is definitely clear is that people want to come together in person where they can, which is why the business conference isn't going to go away for those people that aren't literally in the physical, co-located anyway, geographically. So there needs to be intermittent coming together that isn't virtual.
Yeah, agreed.
Which is what you mean by coming into the office. But,
that's one format of it. No, we have our team quarterly meeting this week. That's another version of it. Right. And as you point out, multinational corporations or even national corporations, I've been working at a distance from half my team for 10 years.
Exactly. I honestly believe that we are in an era fully of distributed workforces, of less fixed office space, of not having central HQs, but lots of mini hubs and satellite organizations, so that coming into the office means gathering to do something. It is quite clear, even though I've spent a lot of time on my podcast and in my research looking at, the perfect pod, soundproofed. I can tell you the World Economic Forum's office in Geneva has a very lovely little suite of soundproofed offices, and those that can afford it make a wonderful working environment. But it's not actually enough. It's just not enough. It's
choreography choreography is such a beautiful word. The other kind of element I'll add into it as we continue to learn is I think the history of companies matters here, meaning I'm convinced you can have a fully remote company that is incredibly effective. I'm not sure if you can do it starting from having been in person, but I look at companies like GitLab or Envision that started fully distributed and they seem to do just fine. And I think we're figuring out the habits around this. And so your investigation of it is really wonderful. I just want to make sure to put up for folks so they can find it, the URL for where they can find your book and podcast, and
much.
Yeah, of course,
and obviously on Bloomberg WorkShift, which
course.
anyone interested in this space should be hot-footing it to. Have some
and
great
your website as well, and yes, Bloomberg WorkShift too. All really a great team, and I'm thrilled that our company has devoted some attention to this. Any parting thought before we wrap, Julia?
Well, just to say that it's complicated, but we shouldn't be daunted, that I think this is in fact a revolutionary moment, and out of revolution comes change, and the workplace needed change, people needed change, and we've got it.
Amen. I mean, the legacy of going in, when you were describing going to the office, what I heard in my head was the legacy of factories, of people going into work on the assembly line. It's just that their assembly station was a desk. And clearly we can do better than that, and we're just figuring out how. So I'm grateful for your exploration and to continue learning from you. Thank you for taking the time to be here and us doing this remotely at a distance. And I look forward to the next time we get to see each other in person. So
exactly. Thank you so much for having me. Bye-bye.
For everybody here, thank you very much. And we operate on your questions. So please feel free to ask them and to be continued. Thanks, Julia.